In the middle of a family gathering after I refused to hand over my coffee shop worth $210,000 to my brother, my dad threw his glass of red wine straight at my face. He screamed, "Watch your tone. I'm still your father, and you're not going to disrespect me in front of this family." The entire room went dead silent, and I just stood there, letting the red wine drip down my face, down my neck, soaking into my cream silk blouse. That was the moment I decided to walk away from my family, to leave the house I grew up in, to protect what little dignity I had left as a 30-year-old woman. Stay with me through this whole story and tell me, was I wrong for walking away and taking back what was mine? Hello everyone, I'm Marlowe. I'm 30 years old and I've been working in finance for 8 years. Right now, I live alone in a small house in Franklin, Tennessee, a quiet suburb just south of Nashville. This house is the result of years of working and living below my means. I didn't splurge. I didn't take fancy vacations. I didn't chase designer labels the way many women my age do to show off on social media. Even though my life is pretty stable now, there are moments when I still feel lonely inside my own home. Not because I don't have family, but because over a year ago, I decided to cut ties with them completely. I grew up in a family of 2 kids. My younger brother's name is Declan, who is 4 years younger than I am. Even as a little kid, I picked up on a harsh truth pretty early. Declan was always the favorite. Not in a normal, loving way, but in the kind of way where every single mistake he made got swept under the rug, and every failure always had a ready-made excuse. If he got a bad grade, my mom would say the teacher wasn't fair. If he quit a job halfway through, my dad would say the work environment just wasn't the right fit for him. Never his fault. For me, it was the complete opposite. I was always told to be understanding, patient, and to set an example for my brother. "You're the older one. That's just how it is." That's the line they repeated to me my entire childhood. I never got the chance to back down, and I wasn't allowed to be tired or complain. If I stayed quiet, they called me cold. If I spoke up, they immediately slapped the labels selfish and difficult on me. I got used to it. Not because it was okay, but because I knew very clearly that if I kept expecting anything from them, I'd only end up more broken. Even though my entire childhood was one long stretch of favoritism and comparison, there was still one person in that house who always looked at me differently. The only one in the family who made me feel like I wasn't completely invisible was my grandpa, Grandpa Harlan. He wasn't the type to use flowery words. He didn't hug me all the time or constantly check in on me, but the way he showed love always made me feel seen and understood, in the way that a girl forgotten by her own family always desperately needs. I still remember every time I visited him, whether it was a surprise or planned, there was always a cup of coffee waiting on the table. Black, no sugar, exactly the way I liked it. He'd look at me and say, "A girl like you doesn't need things sweet. Oh, you're sharper than everyone else in this house already." Then he'd sit there quietly listening to me talk, sometimes not saying a word, just nodding and sipping his coffee. But I knew he was taking in every single thing I said. When I first graduated, I just landed my first job, but the paycheck was barely anything, and everything hit at once. Rent, electric bills, water bills, and even getting my old car fixed on the exact day I had a client meeting. I didn't say a word to anyone at home because I already knew what I'd get back. Figure it out yourself, you're an adult. But then, the next morning, I got a notification that money had been transferred into my account. The sender was Grandpa Harlan. When I called to ask about it, he just said one thing: "I don't have a lot saved up, but it's enough so you don't have to struggle alone." After that, he never brought it up again, and he never asked me to promise him anything. But to me, that was the first time someone in my family chose to stand in my corner without asking me to prove a single thing. Every year at Thanksgiving, when everyone crowded around the table making small talk out of obligation, he was the only one who'd look at me and ask, "You still writing those little notes in your journal, kiddo?" He was the only one who remembered that I used to love writing, and the only one who kept every single greeting card I'd ever sent him since I was little. He had them all stacked neatly inside an old wooden box sitting next to his reading chair. To me, he wasn't just family, and he was the quiet witness to all the years I pushed forward without anyone ever acknowledging it. But then, 2 years ago, he left me too. I remember it clearly. It was a Monday morning. I'd just gotten to the office when Dad called and told me he'd passed away in his sleep. In that moment, my chest felt like it caved in. I knew I wasn't just losing my grandpa, I was losing the only person who had ever stood up for me in this family. 30 days after the funeral, all 4 of us gathered at attorney Thaddeus Whitaker's office in downtown Nashville to hear the will he'd left behind. In the will that was read that day, the attorney made everything very clear. Grandpa had divided his estate in a specific and deliberate way. Declan and I each received $225,000. Mom and Dad each received $110,000. The house that Mom, Dad, and Declan were currently living in would be co-owned by Declan and me. In the will, Grandpa explained exactly why. Because Mom and Dad had always favored Declan, he didn't trust leaving everything in their hands. He was afraid that if he did, I'd end up with nothing after he was gone. Right after that, Dad spoke up and asked about Grandpa's own house. The attorney, Mr. Whitaker, gave a simple answer. Mr. Harlan sold that property a few months ago for $670,000. That's where the funds being distributed today came from. The moment he said that, I understood. Grandpa had thought of everything. He wasn't being unfair to Mom, Dad, or Declan, but he knew very well that if he didn't arrange things himself, I'd be the one left holding nothing after he was gone. So he did all of it in advance, quietly and carefully, so the granddaughter he loved wouldn't get shortchanged. Hearing the entire will, a deep wave of gratitude washed over me, mixed with tears I was barely holding back in my throat. And I made a silent promise to him that I'd use the money he left me wisely, that I wouldn't waste it, and that I wouldn't let anyone drag me back into the same cycle of unfairness he'd worked so hard to pull me out of. After $225,000 landed in my account, I knew I had to use it the right way. As someone who works in finance, I understand that letting money sit idle for too long is one of the fastest ways to lose its value. A few days later, I started doing something I'd been thinking about for a long time, opening a coffee shop. Not because I was passionate about brewing coffee or wanted to change careers, but because I believed that if I built the right way, it would become a solid investment and generate steady income over time. I put about $210,000 into the project. A little over a month later, my first coffee shop officially opened. Even after opening the shop, I didn't quit my job. Every morning, I still went into my office in downtown Nashville, still met with clients, still did my finance work, like normal. As for running the shop, I handed that off to a manager I'd carefully selected from the start and fully trusted. On opening day, I invited friends, co-workers, and close family. Mom and Dad showed up too, with Declan. Part of me thought that this time they'd be proud of me. Maybe they'd finally see the effort this daughter of theirs had put in and say something different from what I'd always heard. But then, right in the middle of everyone raising their glasses and celebrating, Mom leaned over and said quietly into my ear, her voice soft but loaded, "You really should have handed this business model over to your brother, Marlowe." I didn't respond. I didn't react at all. I just smiled, like I always had. Because I'd long since gotten used to the fact that my parents always wanted the best for my brother. And for me, those things never came from them. As for Declan, after he received his $225,000, he didn't invest it. He didn't put it in savings either. Instead, he dove headfirst into one endless party after another. Nights out at bars along Broadway, spontaneous trips to Miami and Las Vegas without any real reason, dinner tabs he never even glanced at. Everything moved so fast that even people in our own family didn't notice what was happening until it was too late. Just 1 year later, the money was completely gone. I didn't hear it from him directly. I heard it from his close friends. A few of them texted me, and others left traces by posting photos on Instagram. In those pictures, Declan was posing next to sports cars rented by the day, sitting at bottle service tables booked out a week in advance, with cocky, boastful captions beneath. I didn't need to ask anyone to know exactly what had gone down. And on top of everything, during one of those out-of-control nights, he got a girl pregnant. She wasn't his official girlfriend, and it definitely wasn't a serious relationship. But the consequences were real, and nobody in my family could pretend otherwise. That scandal, which happened about a year before all of this, was what lit the fuse. A real, full-blown confrontation was coming, and I ended up right at the center of the whole thing. 1 year ago, it was a weekend in April. I drove back to my parents' house after Mom called and told me to come home right away. After over an hour on I-24 from Franklin up to Clarksville, I pulled in around 10 in the morning. Out front, cars were lined up bumper to bumper on both sides of the street, mostly belonging to Mom's side of the family. As soon as I found a spot to park, I walked inside carrying the bottle of wine Mom had asked me to pick up that morning. The moment I stepped in, a vague feeling crept over me. Aside from the familiar faces of Mom, Dad, and Declan, there were nearly 20 relatives scattered from the living room all the way back to the dining area. The mood wasn't exactly tense, but it was enough to make me feel like something had been arranged behind my back. And then, among all those familiar faces, I noticed a girl I didn't recognize. She was sitting pretty close to Declan, looking a little reserved, her eyes scanning the room like someone who'd never been there before. After a few exchanges and an introduction from Declan, I learned her name was Juniper, and that she was his girlfriend. About 10 minutes later, the gathering officially got started. At that point, I still figured this was just a casual get-together so Declan could introduce his girlfriend to everyone. Nothing too out of the ordinary. But then, just a short while after, Mom cut straight to the point. She stood up, looked around the room, smiled, and announced that Juniper was 3 months pregnant. She said the family was planning to hold a wedding for the two of them the following month. The room immediately erupted in applause. Everyone congratulated Declan, and I wasn't any different. I clapped along and turned to my brother. "Congrats, I'm really happy for you." After the noise and laughter started to die down, Mom stood up one more time. She looked around the room, her expression emotional, and began to speak. "Our family is about to welcome a new member. Declan and Juniper are stepping into a new chapter, and I know they're going to do great." She paused for a moment like she was catching her breath or making sure everyone was listening, then continued. "But I also know that family life has never been easy, especially when Declan still doesn't have a stable job and Juniper is pregnant." And then she looked straight at me, her voice dropping just a notch. "Marlowe, I know how hard you've worked. I'm genuinely proud of everything you've built. But today, I want you to think a little more. Think about your brother. Think about the niece or nephew you're about to have." My heart nearly stopped when she finished that sentence. I knew exactly where this was heading, and just like I expected, she said it directly to my face. "I think you should sign the coffee shop over to Declan. Think of it as a wedding gift. A gift for your brother and for the baby on the way." After that, I heard a few relatives start nodding along. Someone said it loud enough for me to hear clearly. Exactly. Marlowe's the older sister. She should be looking out for her brother. In that moment, I could feel the whole room tipping to one side. They weren't just waiting for my answer. They already assumed I'd say yes. To them, I was a woman, and the older sibling on top of that, so of course I was supposed to sacrifice. That logic had been written into their heads since I was a little girl. I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, eyes on the glass in front of me. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was weighing whether I should say the thing none of them wanted to hear. After almost a full minute of silence, I looked straight at Mom and told her, "Are you serious right now? That coffee shop is everything I've poured myself into. I put $210,000 into it, and now you're telling me to hand it over as a wedding gift for Declan? That is never going to happen." She fired back immediately without missing a beat. "Marlowe, your brother is unemployed, and he's about to become a father. We're family. Are you really going to sit there and watch your niece or nephew come into this world without anyone properly taking care of them?" Before she even finished, I stood up, brushed off the stares from the 24 relatives watching me, and asked flat out, "Then where did the $225,000 Declan inherited from Grandpa go?" The moment I brought up the money, Declan spoke up. "I invested it with a friend, but it didn't work out, and I lost everything." I let out a small laugh after he said that. Not mocking, just the quiet, bitter kind that slips out when you've heard one too many lies. I looked right at him. "You're lying to me. You've been blowing money for the past year. I don't think I know. Do I need to pull up the Miami photos for everyone right now?" Declan immediately dropped his head after I said that. And before anyone else could jump in, I turned to look at Mom and Dad sitting across from me. "I'm not giving him my coffee shop. If you want it that badly, bring me $225,000 and I'll sign it over to you. Then you can give it to Declan. Give it to his kid. Do whatever you want with it." The second I finished talking, Dad shot up out of his seat, and he grabbed the wine glass off the table and threw it straight into my face. His voice rang out across the dead silent room, shaking with anger. "Watch your tone. I'm still your father, and you're not going to disrespect me in front of this family." The moment that glass of red wine hit my face, the entire room went terrifyingly quiet. The wine poured down from my forehead, across my cheeks, soaking into the cream silk blouse I'd carefully ironed before driving over. The dark red stain spread across the smooth fabric, and I knew right then that the blouse would never come clean again. The sharp, tangy smell of fermented wine mixed with the burning, humiliating sensation on my skin. But the one thing I could feel most clearly was my dad's eyes. There wasn't a single trace of remorse in them. A few seconds later, I slowly raised my hand and wiped my face, the motion deliberate, like I was wringing out the last of whatever composure I had left. Wine was still dripping from my chin, soaking into my favorite beige scarf, but I didn't care anymore. I just looked around the room once, where every single relative was avoiding my eyes like I was the one who had just ruined the party. When Mom caught my gaze, she quickly looked away. Declan kept his head down and said nothing. And in that room, not one person spoke up for me. Not one woman. Not an aunt, not a cousin, not a sister-in-law. Every single one of them stayed silent. Right after that, I stepped away from the table, picked up my jacket and my bag. Before I walked out the door, I said exactly one thing. "Thank you for reminding me where I stand in this family." And then I left. Behind me, I could hear whispers, people muttering things like, "That girl's always been like that." But I didn't turn around, not once. On the drive back to Franklin that day, I wasn't angry about having wine thrown in my face. The only thing I felt was a deep sadness, slowly working its way through me, like something tightening inside my chest. Tears kept threatening to spill over every time I thought about that moment, but I held them back because I knew if I let them fall right then, I wouldn't be able to drive home safely. I felt sorry for myself, sorry for the way I'd always tried so hard to be a part of this family, and yet I was still just an outsider in the very house I grew up in. If anyone had asked me what I was thinking at that moment, I probably would have said, "I just wish they loved me even a fraction of how much they've always loved Declan." Just a little bit of fairness, and maybe I wouldn't have felt this alone. Everything I have today, my job, my house, my stability, I built all of it by myself. Not a single dollar from them. No one helped me when I needed it. They never once asked if I was doing okay during all those years I was grinding away in Nashville, trying to build something. I remember being 18 when my friends were excitedly picking out colleges, and I was quietly signing a student loan for a huge amount just to be able to go to school at all. 4 years of college went by on bare-bones meals and late-night shifts at a coffee shop near campus until I was completely drained. By the time I was 27, after years of working myself into the ground, I scraped together enough for a down payment and took on a long-term mortgage to buy my first home in Franklin. Declan never had to work a side job, never had to stress about debt. From tuition to living expenses, everything was covered by Mom and Dad. When he graduated, they didn't just let him off the hook, they handed him more money to invest. No matter how many times he failed, they covered for him and made excuses. And through all of that, I never sat around calculating or keeping score. I still came home for the holidays, still sat at the same table, still chipped in for Thanksgiving, still tried to be part of them. Because maybe one day they'd actually see me. They'd finally understand what I'd been through. They'd acknowledge what I'd put in. But then that day came, and I realized the brutal truth. They didn't just fail to see me, they openly demanded I sacrifice more, simply because I'd made something of myself. They weren't happy for me. They looked at what I had and saw a family asset, something to be split up and handed out. And in that moment, I knew it was time to stop. I couldn't keep grinding down my own self-worth to hold on to love from people who had never truly made room for me in their hearts. About an hour later, I was back home in Franklin. The first thing I did was walk straight into the bathroom, turn the shower on as hot as it would go, and let the warm water wash away the smell of wine, still clinging to my skin, my hair, and my memory. Under that shower, I let myself cry. No one was watching, no one was judging, and no one was telling me I had to be strong. A few minutes later, I made myself a black coffee. Even though it was the weekend, I still had some work to get through. But honestly, I just wanted my hands to be busy, so my mind wouldn't keep drifting back to that image of a wine glass being thrown at my face. About 30 minutes after that, my phone rang. It was Aunt Meredith, Mom's younger sister, who had also been there that morning. I picked up after a few rings. Before I could even say hello, and her voice came through loaded with blame. "Marlowe, you went too far today. How could you treat your own parents like that? At the end of the day, they're family. Helping Declan means helping them too." She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't ask whether the wine had burned my skin. She didn't ask how I was emotionally holding up. That was it. The slow burn inside me flared up. I told Meredith straight, "Then you help her. You're her sister too, and if you can't do that, stay out of my business." I hung up right after that. After that call, a sudden wave of missing Grandpa hit me. So vivid I could almost see him sitting by the window, quietly pouring me a cup of coffee and saying, "Come sit down, kiddo." If Grandpa were still alive, he probably would have offered me some quiet, gentle advice, just enough to help me settle down. And if he were still here, I'm certain that no matter how much Mom and Dad favored Declan, they never would have let things go this far. Right at that moment, something flashed into my mind. It was the will he'd left behind. I remembered very clearly in that document Grandpa had written that the house in Clarksville where Mom and Dad were living, I actually owned half of it too, and I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The next morning, I was at Attorney Thaddeus Whitaker's office in downtown Nashville at 8 o'clock sharp. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, I pulled the will out of my folder, set it gently on the desk, and slid it toward him. Mr. Whitaker took it, opened it, and read it carefully again. After reviewing it, he looked up and asked, "What do you need from me, Miss Hartwell?" I didn't hesitate. "I want my half of the house." He quickly followed up. "You mean you want to sell the property and split the proceeds?" I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "If they agree to sell, we split it down the middle. If they want to keep it, they buy out my share at full market value." Mr. Whitaker nodded slowly. He didn't ask any further questions. He just picked up his pen and wrote down the details I gave him: the address, the ownership status, and the name of the co-owner, Declan. After a few notes, he said, "I'll handle this on your behalf." About 30 minutes later, I left his office and drove straight to my company in downtown Nashville. The city felt quieter than usual that Monday morning, but I knew very clearly that a storm was forming. Just as I expected, the next morning my phone started buzzing nonstop from 7 a.m. I didn't pick up a single call. I blocked all of their numbers. Then I went through each of my social media accounts and blocked them there as well. Around 5 that evening, after work, I drove home like normal. But just as I turned onto my street in Franklin, I saw 4 people standing outside my front door. Mom, Dad, Declan, and Juniper. What caught me slightly off guard was that they'd brought Juniper along. I'd barely backed into the garage when all 4 of them rushed over before I could even cut the engine. Mom was the first one to speak. Her voice came fast and sharp. "Marlowe, you can't do this. How could you throw your own parents out on the street? How could you sit back and let your niece or nephew come into this world without a roof over their head?" I stepped out of the car and calmly locked the door. Then I looked Mom straight in the eye and said slowly, "I'm done with you all. Don't forget who threw wine at my face. Right now, all I'm doing is taking back what's mine." The second I finished, Declan jumped in. He shouted, "You're a selfish, greedy woman. You already have your own house, you have a coffee shop, and now you want to take this house too and leave Mom and Dad with nothing?" I let out a small laugh after that. Not sarcastic, just the tired, hollow kind from a woman who's heard too many baseless accusations for too long. A few seconds later, I replied, "The will clearly states that you and I co-own this house. It doesn't say anywhere that I can't sell it. So you have 2 options. 1, buy out my share at market value. 2, we sell it, split the money 50-50, and we each go our separate ways. Done." After I said that, all 4 of them just stood there staring at me. I kept going. "If you're not off my property in the next minute, I'm calling the police. This is my home. You're trespassing." After that, complete silence. None of them said another word. Maybe they finally understood I wasn't saying this out of anger. I was saying it because I was done. Fully and completely. About a minute later, the first one to turn around and walk away was Dad. Then Mom. Juniper and Declan followed after them. I stood there and watched until they disappeared around the end of the block. In that moment, I didn't feel relieved. I wasn't angry either. Just a strange, quiet sense of peace settling inside me. 2 months later, the house in Clarksville was officially sold. Declan chose to sell and split the money. He probably knew that if it went to court, it would end up the same way anyway, and he'd be out more money in legal fees on top of it. The house was valued at exactly $540,000, and per Grandpa's will, I received half. The moment the money hit my account, I didn't spend it or celebrate. The first thing I did was sit down and start planning my second coffee shop. After the first location had performed beyond what I'd expected, I knew I was on the right track, and it was time to scale. A few days later, I found a great space in the Gulch, one of Nashville's most vibrant and modern neighborhoods, surrounded by office buildings. I went with a minimalist yet warm design, light brown leather chairs, and soft yellow lighting. And this time I added a grab-and-go model alongside the sit-down experience, making it easy for the office crowd to swing by in the morning. On opening day for the second shop, I didn't invite Mom and Dad. I didn't call Declan or anyone else from that side of the family, because I already knew, even if I did, they wouldn't come. About 4 months later, on a weekend evening while I was sorting through paperwork in my home office, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Sterling, my cousin, the daughter of Aunt Meredith. I opened it and paused. It was a photo of a newborn sleeping peacefully in a cream-colored crib. Tiny face, calm, and something about it looked just like Declan when he was little. Right below the photo, Sterling had written just a few words. "Declan's baby. It's a boy." I stared at the picture for a long moment, then called Sterling back. After a few pleasantries, she caught me up on everything that had been going on with my family. After the house sold, Mom and Dad had taken their entire $220,000. The sale proceeds combined with what Grandpa had left them in the will. Dad used it to help Declan buy a smaller place in the suburbs of Clarksville. After getting that money, Declan stopped blowing it on parties and people. He picked up extra shifts at a construction company, got more focused, and actually started stepping up for his new little family. Hearing Sterling tell it, I felt something lift inside me, and honestly, a part of me was glad my brother had finally decided to grow up. He was still my brother, after all, and I'd never actually wanted him to fail. But after I hung up with Sterling, I felt a dull ache settle in my chest. Not because I was jealous of the baby in that photo, but because I was confronted with a painful truth. Mom and Dad hadn't changed. They still gave everything their best to Declan, still willing to empty themselves for him. And me, in their eyes, I was still just the daughter who could take care of herself. No need to check in, no need to worry about. A daughter whose silence was mistaken for strength. A daughter whose self-sufficiency was used as an excuse not to love her. If someone asked me right now whether I regret the decisions I made, my answer is no. I don't regret it because more than anyone, I know exactly what I went through. The losses, the times I was dismissed just for being a daughter, the moments I stood in a room full of family and felt completely alone. I chose to stand up for myself, not because I'm cold or because I don't love my family, but because I knew that if I didn't do it, nobody else would do it for me. And after everything I've been through, I want to leave you with 5 pieces of advice I've taken away from my own story. Number 1, keep your finances in your own hands and never let anyone pressure you into giving up your assets just because of family loyalty. Someone who truly loves you will never put you in a position where you have to choose between your money and your relationship. Number 2, learn to say no without over-explaining yourself. As women, we tend to justify every decision we make because we're afraid of hurting people's feelings. You don't owe anyone an explanation for living your truth. Number 3, always have a clear will or legal document in place for every major asset. I was lucky because Grandpa did that for me, but not everyone gets that lucky. If you share property with family members, talk to a lawyer and get everything in writing early. Feelings can change, but legal documents will protect you when things fall apart. Number 4, block and distance yourself from people who constantly make you feel like you're not enough, even when those people are family. When your mental health is worth more than any toxic relationship, and cutting someone off doesn't make you a bad person, it just means you're mature enough to know what's good for you. And the last one, build yourself a life that's independent, both financially and emotionally, especially if you're a woman. A stable job, a home of your own, savings that can carry you for 6 months if you lose income. Those are the things that'll give you the confidence to say no to anyone who tries to pressure you into living life on their terms. This story I've shared today has come to an end, and before I say goodbye, I want to ask you one question. If you were me, what would you do? Would you stay quiet to keep the peace, or would you speak up to protect what you deserve? Would you have done what I did, or do you think there's a better way to handle it? You can drop your thoughts down in the comments below, and if this story meant something to you, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with someone you think needs to hear it. Thank you so much for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next one.